Ashiya Douman, caster of Limbo, the beautiful carnivore, and the most trusted man in Chaldea. But how well does FGO's Ashiya Douman compare to his historical and mythical counterpart? And what grade would I give his depiction? Let's get into it. Ashiya Douman is an alter ego class servant, the second one I have covered. Now, if you were to look at the legends, caster is the obvious choice for Douman, since he is well known as an Onmyoudou, a practitioner of Onmyoudou. I'll be getting into what that Onmyoudou stuff is in the backstory section. Douman being an alter ego is clearly an influence from his time serving the foreign god, where his spirit origin had several more entities added to it, 3 of them. The first one is Itzpapaloto, the obsidian butterfly, an Aztec goddess who both kindly watches over the souls of those who died in childbirth, but who also engages in some frightful acts of violence, very much a dual-natured deity. Guess which one of those 2 aspects Douman favors? The second is Chernobog, an old Slavic deity that can either symbolize misfortune, bad luck, or even something akin to the devil, the dark counterpart to a more benevolent god. It's a bit murky. There is still debate as to what importance Chernobog actually had in Slavic paganism. The last entity added to Ashiya Douman's spirit origin is not like the other 2. Not only is it not a deity, but it is someone who is directly connected to Ashiya Douman himself. This is Akuryo Safu, also known as Fujiwara no Akimitsu. Akimitsu was the minister of the left, one of the top officials who oversaw state affairs in the government. I'll be saying more about him once we get to Douman's MP. Anyway, when it comes to class, Douman normally should be a caster, but his affiliation with the foreign god has made him an alter ego instead. Getting into his character design, Douman has quite the unique design. It certainly got attention when he first appeared in Shimosa, which led to him becoming a major part of the Lost Belts later on. The illustrator says that the starting point for Douman's design was to make him look like a Pierrot, but with a Japanese flair. A Pierrot is a type of character found in pantomime acts starting in the late 1600s, and, well, I can see the resemblance, though I'd say Douman looks more like a Harlequin instead. The impression given is that of a character staging a play, a mastermind behind the scenes. Also mentioned is how he is designed to look attractive, but also feral and dangerous. But something I noticed while looking at his first ascension is what's in the background. If you look closely, you can see the shapes of animals there. A blue dragon, a white tiger, a red phoenix, and something that looks like a black snake, but you can also sorta see a turtle shell. It's weird. This is a reference to the 4 symbols, the guardians of the 4 cardinal directions of north, south, east, and west. They are even positioned more or less where they are supposed to be. While these 4 guardians are perhaps best known for their role in things like feng shui, they also come up in Onmyoudou, the magic that Douman makes use of both in FGO and in legend. For my part, I'm mostly familiar with these 4 gods because they show up as boss fights in Final Fantasy XIV, Genbu, Byakko, Suzaku, and Seiryu. Douman starts to look more ominous when you get into his second ascension, still looking like his first, but now with more influence from the entities that have been attached to his spirit origin. Most obvious are the eyes and mouths upon his chest, the demonic minister of the left, Akuryo Safu, which features in Douman's MP. Lastly, we get to his third ascension, where he goes full Dark Lord. He still has a Japanese look, of course, but he's also likely being influenced by the 2 deities that were added to his spirit origin, Itzpapalotl and Chernobog, both of whom are associated with the color black. I can't really compare Douman's FGO design to past depictions of him. It's exceptionally hard to find things about Douman that aren't connected to this game. He's very much an example of the Astolfo effect, where Fate's version of the character has overtaken the original in popularity. Literally, the only artwork I have of Douman is him depicted in a kabuki play. So long as Douman looks like a powerful magic user of Japanese origin who very much looks the villain, I'd call that a win. As for his final ascension, well, is it just me or should we hook him up with Sessio and Chiara? I wonder how those 2 would get along. Moving into his skill set, Douman's first skill is Ridicule Cat, which is Douman's specialized version of the skill Sabotage, a generic skill symbolizing the use of traps to weaken an enemy, which you can find on servants like Robin Hood and Fuma Kotaro. In Douman's case, his version of this skill is much like that, to cause a mess for his enemies, but on a society-wide scale. We certainly have seen him get up to such things many times in FGO, in Shimosa, in Yuga Kshetra, and in Heian Kyo. Being a troublemaker is pretty much Douman's trademark in FGO, but is he one in the legends? Well, yes, but not on this scale. As I'll get into more once I get into his backstory, Ashiya Douman is known as the rival to Abe no Seimei, the most famous of all practitioners of Onmyoudou. There are many stories of Douman trying to screw with Seimei, to undermine him or prove his superiority over him, usually failing miserably. But Douman going after society as a whole to cause mayhem and carnage? That's more of an FGO thing. Douman's second skill is Onyx Life, which itself is a modification of another skill Douman normally has, Life Continuation. Let's start with Life Continuation. This is the skill that allows Douman to cheat death, by creating Shikigami that he can send out while his main body remains safely hidden elsewhere. This is a bit more than the usual depictions of Shikigami, which are conjured spirits that an Onmyoudou uses to carry out certain tasks. Since they can be replaced with another spell, the caster will typically use them much like how Douman does, to do things that might be a bit too dangerous for the mage's liking. These Shikigami can be given form by their caster, or even possess and manipulate other beings instead. But using Shikigami is potentially dangerous. If the caster is not careful or skilled enough to keep control of them, the Shikigami will go after the mage. Anyway, Douman makes extensive use of Shikigami in FGO, usually to create a copy of himself that he can send out to cause trouble. If it gets killed, no problem, he can just make another. At least, that was the case before Peperoncino ruined that for him, forcing Douman to use his real body during the events of Heian Kyo. That's the base skill, Life Continuation. Onyx Life is a variation of that, altered by the presence of the god Chernobog that Douman is fused with. Chernobog is known as a black god, a deity that brings misfortune, and the influence of this god is probably why this skill gives those buffs to chaotic and evil-aligned allies, instead of just being a gut skill. As for the Onyx bit, Onyx is a black mineral, but I don't see any connection between the mineral and Chernobog. The localizers probably just chose Onyx rather than black because it sounds cooler. Lastly, Douman's third skill is Douman's Curse, which, despite the name, is actually meant to represent Douman's varied talents for magic. Onmyoudou, applying curses, hexes, and other things like that. It is even claimed that Douman can wield Hojutsu, supernatural powers derived from Buddhism, and the Xian arts, Taoist magics you see wielded by servants like Zhang Jue or Taigong Wan. Now, elements of both Buddhism and Taoism are part of Onmyoudou, so by itself this doesn't sound strange. However, the way this is described in the FGO materials, it says that Douman brags about his learning of very powerful spells, having journeyed all the way to the Vulture Peak in India to do so. That mountain is a sacred location in Buddhism, said to be a place the Buddha visited many times during his life. But since Douman doesn't actually use any of these amazing spells he supposedly knows, and considering Douman's tendency to lie and be not at all shy about causing mayhem, I'm thinking he's just making it up, trying to sound more powerful than he actually is. This is a notable part of Douman's characterization, both in the legends about him and in his depiction in the Fate franchise.
秋光殿、お目覚めよ。来たれ、暗黒の帳。太陽はここに生まれ変わる。狂乱怒涛、悪霊作。
Ashiya Douman's noble phantasm is Mad Maelstrom Akurio Safu, whereupon he summons a demon-looking thing over a city, then unleashes curses upon his foes. So what's going on here? As mentioned before, Akurio Safu is another name for Fujiwara no Akimitsu. In one of the stories found in the book Ui Shui Monogatari, Akimitsu's daughter Enshi was married to the son of the emperor, Prince Atsuakira. But when the prince decided to take the daughter of the Minister of the Right, Fujiwara no Michinaga, as a second wife, Enshi was abandoned, soon dying of heartbreak. Akimitsu, seeking revenge, decided to approach an Onmyoji to place a curse upon Michinaga, to kill all of Michinaga's daughters. That Onmyoji's name was Ashiya Douman, and after the deaths of Michinaga's daughters, Akimitsu became known as Akurio Safu, the demonic minister of the left. Obviously this connects with Ashiya Douman's legend, but there is a bit more going on with this MP. Since Michinaga would come to dominate the government during his later tenure as Minister of the Right, and later regent for the Emperors Sanjo and Go Ichijo, the curse this MP inflicts brings ruin to the entire city that Michinaga held sway over, Heian Kyo, Kyoto. No doubt this is being enhanced by Douman's own malevolence, plus the two divine spirits added to his spirit origin. In short, this MP is based upon the curse Akimitsu asked Douman to put on Michinaga, but now on a city-wide scale. Douman's craft essence is Vindication, depicting a skull split in half in a field. It's quite obvious that whoever this person was didn't have a happy ending, but who does it belong to? Well, the CE's text hints that it might actually be Douman's own skull, back from when he was killed in the legends. In the book Abe no Seimei Monogatari, we get a plotline where, spoiler alert, Ashiya Douman is killed. The story is that Douman, wanting the secret Onmyoudou books Abe no Seimei had earned during his studies, starts an affair with Seimei's wife Rika while Seimei is off in China. Sensing trouble, Hakudo, Seimei's mentor, told Seimei to return home, and to be careful of his wife. When Seimei returns, Douman confronts him by saying that he now possesses the knowledge of those special books, but Seimei rejects this since Douman would have had to earn them from Hakudo. Then Douman makes a bet that he can prove Seimei wrong, and that the loser of the bet would be killed. Seimei takes the bet, Douman pulls out a copy of the books he had transcribed from the originals, and then chopped off Seimei's head. Hakudo, sensing that Seimei had been killed, then went to Japan and resurrected him. By the time Hakudo confronted Douman, Douman and Rika had married. Hakudo asked Douman if he had seen Seimei. Douman said Seimei was dead, Hakudo said Seimei was alive, and then another bet was made where if it could be proven that Seimei was alive, then the loser's life was forfeit. Douman took the bet, Seimei walked in, very much alive, and both Douman and Rika were killed by Hakudo. Now strictly speaking it says Douman was beheaded rather than having his skull split in half. But I'll give this a pass because while a skull in a field doesn't say much, a skull split cleanly in half, that can only be the result of a bloody end. So it was for Douman. On another note, Seimei's wife being named Rika, as a fan of Higurashi, the original Higurashi mind you, not the more recent remake sequel things, I can't help but see the name Rika and think of Higurashi's Rika. Anyway, moving on. Douman's Valentines CE is Douman's talisman, depicting exactly as advertised. But it's also got a really ominous vibe with all of that purple smoke, vibes, miasma stuff. And based on what is said in the CE's text, this gift is cursed and we should totally get rid of it, immediately. I'm not sure why Douman would give a gift like this. I mean, if word got out that he gave the protagonist a cursed item, and said protagonist was afflicted by it, there are literally hundreds of servants in Chaldea who would want Douman's head. He probably can't help himself. Now for characterization, starting with a look into the legends surrounding Ashiya Douman. But before we can properly dig into that, we need to talk about two other things first, Onmyoudou and Douman's rival Abe no Seimei. The reason why is because Ashiya Douman is one of those figures who you can't talk about independently. His story connects too much to that of another. It's like how you can't talk about Hephaestion without talking about Alexander. You can't talk about Enkidu without talking about Gilgamesh. You can't talk about Skahak without talking about Cuchulainn. And you can't talk about Ashiya Douman without talking about Abe no Seimei. But unlike those other examples, Abe no Seimei isn't in Fate Grand Order, at least not as a servant. Not yet anyway. Abe no Seimei is one of those major figures from Japanese history and legend that I'm surprised isn't a servant in FGO yet, alongside Tokugawa Ieyasu and Hattori Hanzo. Perhaps they are being saved for a special occasion. Anyway, let's start with Onmyoudou, the magic used by both Abe no Seimei and Ashiya Douman. What is it? Onmyoudou roughly translates to the way of yin and yang, and is a system where its practitioners would look at the positions of stars in celestial bodies, and from there determine whether or not it was good or bad fortune to do something on a given day or time. Now, if this sounds like something I've talked about before, it's because it is. This is the same system I talked about in my video on Taisui Shingjun, the sexagenary cycle, Wushin, the 5 elements, all that. It's a very old philosophy in China that dates back at least 2,000 years, with it being imported to Japan in the 6th century. Over time, however, this evolved into something more uniquely Japanese, adding elements from Shinto, Buddhism, and other philosophies. It got its own government department, the Bureau of Onmyo, which would be the only place in Japan where people could be officially trained in its arts. The practitioners of Onmyoudou, the Onmyoji, would use their talents to determine whether this government policy was a good idea, to ward off evil spirits, to boost the yield of the harvest, to inflict curses upon their enemies, and so on. Indeed, Onmyoudou would be the origin of the Ofuda, those paper talisman things said to have divine power within them, though their later use expanded to Shinto and Japanese Buddhism as well. Onmyoudou became increasingly important for the imperial court, reaching the height of its influence during the 10th century. During that time, the Bureau of Onmyo came under the leadership of first Kamo no Tadayuki and then his son Kamo no Yasunori, with both of them expanding the Bureau's knowledge and making its influence felt by the general population. They would, of course, continue to teach newcomers to the Bureau in their arts, and one of their students would end up becoming a master Onmyoji in his own right, a man named Abe no Seimei. Seimei's skill at Onmyoudou gave him great influence at the imperial court, advising emperors and ministers throughout his long life. He lived from 921 CE to 1005 CE. The descendants of the Kamo and Abe families would come to dominate the Bureau of Onmyo, its members leading it for centuries to come. Later, the Kamo family, renamed the Kata no Koji family, would break up during the Muromachi period, and the Abe family, now the Tsuchi Mikado family, would take full control of the Bureau, their descendants holding on to its positions all the way until the abolition of the Bureau in 1870. But let's get back to Abe no Seimei. While Seimei was a real person whose life is documented, in the centuries afterwards he became the subject of many fictional works, turning him into a master of all sorts of magic. He was said not to be entirely human, being the child of a human man and a kitsune, a fox spirit. Basically, he's a Japanese Merlin, except we know that Abe no Seimei was a real person. Seimei was portrayed as the sage who could predict the future, face off against evil spirits, and protect the capital from forces that threatened it. His seal was the pentagram, the five-pointed star meant to symbolize the five elements. Seimei appears in the legends of Shuten Doji, Ibaraki Doji, Minamoto no Raiko and the Four Heavenly Kings, and either he or one of his descendants also plays a key role in the legend of Tamamo no Mai. I'll of course cover all of that when I get into my videos about them sometime in the future. But all of those legends were ones where Abe no Seimei was facing a threat to the capital or its leading figures. In other legends, Seimei faced a very different threat, one to his position as the leading practitioner of Onmyoudou in the imperial court, a rival who sought to usurp his position for himself. That rival may have been based off of another Heian period Onmyoji who, rather than being a member of the Bureau, instead lived in Harima province, a man named Doma Hoshi. Unlike Abe no Seimei, we have few other details about Hoshi, not even the years he lived. But in the legends that were written about Abe no Seimei later on, either Doma Hoshi himself or a new character based off of him would be created to serve as the rival to Abe no Seimei, a character we now know as Ashiya Douman. He would become the rival to Abe no Seimei, the jealous and haughty evil character who kept trying to prove his superiority over the Seimei of Justice who used his powers to protect the people of Heian Kyo. If you look at Ashiya Douman's FGO profile, they list 3 stories that FGO's Douman is based upon. The first is the Uji Shui Monogatari, a collection of short stories written by an unknown author sometime in the 13th century. Most of the tales have nothing to do with Douman or Abe no Seimei, but a few of them do, where Seimei uses his powers to defeat a curse, where his powers are tested by others, and most notably, the story I described in Douman's MP, where the vengeful Lord Akimitsu sought Douman's help to inflict a curse upon Lord Michinaga's daughters. The second source is Abe no Seimei Monogatari, the tale of Abe no Seimei, written by Asai Ryoi in 1662. This book seems to be the primary source, since it contains numerous stories of Douman's rivalry with Abe no Seimei, ones where Douman tries to prove himself superior to Seimei, but then gets humiliated in spectacular fashion. One tale describes a contest between Douman and Seimei where Douman challenges Seimei to divine what is inside a particular box, with Douman having arranged beforehand to have someone put mandarin oranges in the box. Douman divines that there are oranges in the box, because of course he does, but Seimei says that the box is actually filled with rats. When the box is opened to check, it does turn out to be full of rats, because Seimei used his magic to turn the oranges into rats. Later on in the book we get the story I mentioned in Douman's Craft Essence, the one where Douman seduces Seimei's wife Rika, Douman kills Seimei, but then Douman and Rika get killed by a resurrected Seimei and his mentor. Lastly, we have Ashiya Douman Oshi Kagami, a bunraku play, Japanese puppet theater, from 1734 by Takeda Izumo, which was adapted into a kabuki play a year later. I'm going to be honest, I couldn't find much info about this one, at least the part specific to Ashiya Douman, because despite the title, much of the play actually gets into the origins of Abe no Seimei, how his mother was a kitsune and all that. That act of the play about Seimei is what is best known today, while the other parts of the story that include Douman are often left out entirely. The only thing I can piece together is that, somewhere in this play, Seimei and Douman engage in another contest of magic, likely ending in Douman's utter humiliation since that seems to be the recurring theme here. But even without those details, we still have enough material from the other sources to get a picture of who Ashiya Douman is in the legends. He is the rival to the great Abe no Seimei who, despite Douman's arrogance and regular use of underhanded methods, tends to see his schemes fail and getting utterly humiliated by his rival. We first meet Douman in the Shimosa Singularity during the Epic of Remnant chapters, where he is the mastermind behind the events of that story. Throughout Shimosa, Douman, or rather the caster of Limbo, proves to be a complete and utter bastard, especially when it concerns Katodanzo. He created the curse of annihilation that he afflicts servants with, leading them to go on bloody rampages throughout the singularity. This very much becomes Douman's trademark, to arrive in a singularity or lost belt, and then work behind the scenes to turn it into an utter hellhole. He does it no less than 3 times, in Shimosa, in Yuga Kshetra, and in Heian Kyo. And of course, since he uses his Shikigamis rather than his main body, until that ability is taken from him in Olympus, whenever you kill Douman, it makes no difference as he just appears again. It's pretty much guaranteed that whenever Douman shows up, he's either going to cause a horrible mess, do something evil, or be such a dislikable prick that even his fellow apostles seem to want him dead. All of that is obvious at first glance, but why is he doing all this? What is Douman's goal? Well, it's actually the exact same thing it was in the legends about him, to surpass and defeat his rival, Abe no Seimei. When you first meet Douman in Shimosa, he actually introduces himself as Abe no Seimei, though nobody believes it due to how blatantly evil Douman is. It may be forgotten between all of the and the cruelties he inflicts, but Douman is very fixated upon Seimei. When he's not indulging his appetite for hurting others, Douman is focused upon acquiring more power for himself. He teams up with the foreign god, experiments with ideas in Shimosa and the Indian Lost Belt, but his most dramatic effort is in Heian Kyo, where he tries to become a beast of disaster, hoping that it will give him the power he needs to finally surpass Abe no Seimei. But much like his legend, Douman, for all his talent at magic, has a tendency to screw himself up. Indeed, him being a complete bastard repeatedly comes back to bite him. His excesses in the Indian Lost Belt are what led Pepe to get some payback, by ruining Douman's ability to use Shikigami, ensuring that he would be forced to go back to his main body. His decision to become a beast himself instead of giving that to Ibuki Doji was also a dumb move, since Ibuki was already proving to be more than a match for Chaldea and the Genji warriors. And at the end of Heian Kyo, when at the mercy of his enemies and begging for mercy, his long history of evil deeds ensured that this time, unlike several previous antagonists, there would be no mercy. It's quite satisfying to have it be Katodanzo deal the finishing blow, since he was particularly cruel to her both in Shimosa and in her own interlude. So his evil has a tendency to blow up in his face. But even aside from that, his plan to become more powerful than Abe no Seimei by becoming a beast blows up when, as he tended to do in the stories, Douman didn't fully think things through. In one of the funniest scenes in all of FGO, Abe no Seimei, Douman's rival and the object of his obsession, proceeds to tell Douman just how much of an idiot he is, that he can't become a beast because he has no love for humanity, which is a requirement for becoming a beast, whether it be Goethe's wish to remove the concept of death, Tiamat's desire to nurture humanity, or Sessio and Chiara's... moving on. The failure of Douman's plan to become a beast is reminiscent of his repeated failures to best Abe no Seimei in the legends, that Douman missed some key detail, and so his entire plan fell apart. Perhaps the biggest insult of all is that Seimei only communicates remotely. He doesn't bother showing up in person, because Douman is beneath him and can be easily handled by Chaldea and the Genji. For a guy who was so obsessed with becoming better than Abe no Seimei, that had to have stung. Despite his death in the main story though, Douman has since been summoned to Chaldea, though basically nobody likes or trusts him. In contrast to his more sinister villainy in Shimosa, Lost Belt 4, and Heian Kyo, these days Douman has become a troublemaker in events, notably both Summer 6 and Summer 7. He's a popular character, so it makes sense that he would still creep into events now and then. Besides, it was rather funny to see how the other servants of Chaldea treat him in Summer 7. Literally everyone suspects him of being behind the singularity, and when it is revealed that he really is partly responsible, it's funny to see how disappointed Douman is that nobody is surprised by this. He's like Moriarty, but more likely to make a complete ass of himself. I wonder what other events we will see Douman in the future. And now for the verdict. What grade would I give Ashiya Douman's depiction in Fate Grand Order? Well, his character design is very good, having a unique aspect that portrays him well as an evil bastard, with little references to the magic he uses. His skill set is good too, though it has seen some alterations thanks to him being an alter ego. And perhaps uniquely for an alter ego, he gets an entity added that is actually closely connected with Douman's legend, Akurio Safu. As for characterization, it is pretty good too. Douman remains fixated upon Abe no Seimei, but his efforts to surpass Seimei have a tendency to fail in spectacular fashion. In this regard, Douman is very much like his mythical counterpart, the evil rival to Seimei who keeps trying to be better, but can't. But while Ashiya Douman is described as being evil, the impression I got from looking at his legends is that Douman isn't quite the sadistic monster that he is portrayed as in Fate. He's focused upon Abe no Seimei. He isn't trying to completely ruin everything for kicks. In that regard, his portrayals in most of his main story appearances are a bit off, depicting Douman as a guy who gets off on causing as much carnage as possible. He's better depicted in Heian Kyo, where we get something closer to the stories about him, Douman hatching an evil scheme, only to overlook some key detail and watch it blow up in his face. So while FGO does get many things right about Douman, it also exaggerates his villainy to make him a much bigger menace to everyone around him, rather than being singularly focused upon his rival. And so for a final grade, I am going to give Ashiya Douman, the caster of Limbo, a B-. If you would like to learn more about a magic user who was also twisted but more good-natured, check out my video on Merlin here. Until next time.